What I want to do today is build on what we were doing the other day as far as looking at an object and then interpreting the way we see ellipses or shapes in that object. So what I'm going to do today is again draw the same cup that I was drawing before. Y'all can see it right here. I'm going to set it on the table, probably out of view. And this is what I want you to do for your other drawing for Monday. I want you to take one of those angles that you drew before, unless you want to do another object, and that's totally up to you. But what we're going to do is we're going to draw the object as precisely as we can. I want you to take your time. If you want to do gestural lines or even a blind contour just to sort of get things placed, that's fine. But what I'm really looking for is a sort of slowed down analysis of the ellipses. I want you to think about the relationship of width to height. But on a smaller drawing like this, I use this just because it's so easy to flip around. This one is too, but what's nice about this one is it's got the cork on the bottom. So when you're pushing on it, it definitely stays in place. Whereas this one, it's easier to slip around. I'm gonna make a high ground plane. So once again, I'm gonna just quickly decide what's gonna be my picture plane. Always define your picture plane. So there's that one. Now I have to decide what my format is. Because of the shape of that cup, I'm gonna make a square format. So I want you to make this drawing precise. It doesn't have to be detailed. It doesn't have to be shaded. In fact, do not do any shading. I just want to see the lines that I'm going to show you how to draw, and then I want to see you make everything as precise and measured as possible. So real quick here, let me measure this. We've got right at 8 inches. So I'm just going to come over slightly past 8. So here's another thing I want y'all to learn. If I just measure here and measure here, I'm going to probably be close, but always add a couple of extra measurements in the middle, because believe it or not, it's easy to miss one, just even by a 1/16, but it'll make your whole line off. So if you're wanting to do something very precise, I always measure at least 3 or 4 times. So there we go. So I'm going to draw this very light. I'm just making as light a line as possible. I can always go back and darken it once I'm ready. So now what I'm going to think about is, in context to that picture plane, I want to think about where the placement is. So I'm going to make the top of this right about there, and I want the bottom to be right about here. So now what I'm going to do, I want to make sure that everything on here is perfect. So I'm going to basically show you all how to construct a perfect drawing using the rule of ellipses. You may never do this again, but once you do this, it helps you understand how the symmetry and parameters of something can make for a believable drawing. I cannot tell you how many times I've done a drawing and gone, man, something just seems off. And if I actually go back and measure it, I'll find out that one side is a 1/4 inch off, and that's enough to make my drawing just not look believable. So this is what we're going to do. Once I find that, I'm going to find the middle, which is right at 4. And again, I'm going to measure 4 times here. So now this is going to be my center line to construct this drawing on. So I'm going to go ahead and draw this line in very lightly. I tried to sharpen this, but... So now I've got basically my parameters. I've defined the picture plane. I've given myself where the ground plane is going to go. I've given myself the center line and roughly where I want the edges of that to go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just sit there and basically measure. What is the ratio of the width to the height of the top ellipse that I'm seeing? If you want to cheat and actually use your ruler, you have to just make sure that you keep the same distance. I'm going to go with 2. So basically I'm looking at a 2-to-1 ratio, which means if I want to make this 1 inch high or 2 inches high or whatever, then I just double that on the width. So let me just see how far out that probably is. So what I'm going to do is just guess. And I'm going to say visually it seems like maybe 4 1/4. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that. And then I know that my height that I'm wanting is going to be half of that. So that's going to be, so I'm going to come down here. 4 1/4 is going to be 2 1/8. And then I'll make the other one there. So here's basically the boundaries. I don't want you to do this as heavy. I'm drawing these lines dark just so that you can see them on the video. So here are the parameters of my top ellipse. What I want you to do is carefully think about each of these points is going to be the point of tangency. So that means that each of these is going to be where that curve comes around. And then all you got to do is slowly make those curves come in and touch all the way around. And if you need to turn your paper, by all means. When I'm doing paintings, I can't tell you how many times I flip them over, flip them sideways, whatever, because your hand has a natural tendency of an angle to make. If you're trying to draw this way, it's going to be awkward. But if you rotate it to get that natural direction of your drawing, and then just kind of round it off. And now I've got my top ellipse. So basically from this angle, the top ellipse is here and the bottom ellipse drops down just a little bit. So basically I just have to think, how far outside of this does that go? So I'm going to say probably, and you can use visual things to get lines. So I'm basically measuring with my pencil and it's just out a little bit, probably about there. And then what I'm going to do is measure that. Let's just call it 1 2 3/4. So if I come over here and go 1 2 3/4, now make sure that I come up the same distance. So whatever that is here, I'm going to go 1 1/4 is my ground point there. 1 1/4 is my ground point there. So now what I'm going to do is just basically bring this curve around this way. Imagining that it's parallel to this, but sticks out just a tiny bit more than that would have, because as this is here, that's down a little further. Now here's the trick. You have to imagine, even though we're not going to see it, that this ellipse is going to go behind the object. This is the biggest problem I see in a lot of people's drawings, is they don't think about it this way. And this will make a huge difference when we start drawing realistically. You have to know that even though these lines stop at that edge, they actually go behind in reality. So when we draw this object, we want to see, and I know that if this one was the double height, this one's going to be probably just a little bit wider because it's actually rotating away, and we know as it rotates away, it gets wider. So this one was 2 3/4. That's not right. It's not coming out the way I wanted. Yeah, I guess it is. That's exactly why we're doing this, because you don't realize what the real angle of your ellipse is. So here's the actual dimensions of my ellipse for the bottom. See how I was flattening it out? I was making the same mistake that we all do. When you do this measurement, when you're trying to get something precise, you will actually realize that we aren't seeing it right. So that means that the actual boundary to this was not right here, that boundary is actually back here somewhere. And so this is actually where the bottom of my cup would be. So even though I'm not seeing the back side of it, it actually goes up that high. Now I'm just going to kind of look and see, is that really where I want it? I think this is a little too wide, but that's because this has a lip, which actually comes out probably 1/4 inch. So now I'm going to start drawing in my details. Okay, so there's my basic drawing. Now the trick is to go back and make that as precise as possible. So once you've got your lines, okay, this lip actually comes in a little more. What I would normally do is go back with an eraser. I made the lines too dark so you could see them. But what you're gonna do is do all of this preliminary drawing as lightly as possible, and then you're gonna go back. And I do wanna still see those. If you wanna draw in the, I'd like to see the X of your ellipses, just so I know that you were definitely thinking about them. So there's my basic measured drawing. That's going to be the title of this, I think, is I'm just going to call this a measured drawing. I want y'all to realize, like, just like this, if I'd have drawn this the way I was thinking it was going to be, I would have probably made it come around like this, which is actually not it's actually, that would have been completely conflicting perspectives, because if I'd have made this bottom ellipse skinnier than it is wide that much, then it would have been like an object with two different perspectives. So that's why doing it this way, we end up catching problems. And also, when I first drew this in, because I had all this extra space over here, I was tending to want to move this over a little bit. So I would have ended up with a completely incorrect drawing that simply using measurement based on these rules of the ellipse would have allowed me to correct that. Just come back and carefully draw. What I'm doing is I'm looking, as I'm drawing, I'm looking at all of these little gestural lines I made, and I'm just finding the, kind of splitting the difference on them to see where they go. So there is what I want to see on your final drawings. I'd like to see the sketches done in a light pencil, and then once you decide to commit, if you want to draw the definite drawing in pencil, I don't mind if you do this. Or if you want to do it in pen. Be sure to define your picture, your ground plane, and then draw any other details in as needed. I'm doing this in a hurry because I know I'm about to run out of time on the video. So that's basically all I want to see y'all do on this last drawing. Just if you want to do one from the drawings that you already have done or your other drawings, or if you want to start from scratch with a whole new object. But if you're doing some, cylindrical object, just think of that rule of the ellipse and get it drawn as accurately as possible. It's just one of those things just to try to figure out how to use measurements to get a really precise drawing.